How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. I intended to use this sea monster from WizKids in my project this week, but if you saw the thumbnail, you could probably guess that did not work out. I thought I could work around the lack of some of these mid sections of the body. Later on, that became a bigger problem than I had originally anticipated. The reason I chose the sea serpent in the first place was because I had some leftover knights that survived an encounter with some space marines, and I wanted them to face off against a classic medieval monster. These Perry Miniatures minis are very well detailed and have a lot of assembly options, both for the horses and for the knights. You can mix and match all the torsos, arms, legs, and weapons, and you can even add a little laurel wreath if any of your knights survive battles with dragons. After I had picked the loadout for my knight, I began assembling. I gave him a lance and a sheathed sword, as well as a fancy little feather to adorn his fancy little head. I threw him on his steed and I made sure he was glued tight. I attached him to a base so he could stand on his own. Speaking of bases, I made this little frame off camera to use as the walls for my base. I used a piece of clear acrylic as a hardtop to glue the rest of the base layers to, and the acrylic was pretty good at holding horses, but definitely too smooth to hold foam, so I roughed up the surface with an orbital sander. I used some isopropyl alcohol and a paper towel to remove the dust, then I threw on some pink foam, which completed the Neapolitan ice cream color trifecta. I was playing around with ideas for the terrain, and I ended up choosing to have the knight running along a shoreline with the serpent in some water. I started carving the foam away from the edges and creating a slope away from the shoreline. And I was in the process of making some mounting holes for the base when I realized this wasn't going to work the way I'd hoped it would. Originally, I had wanted to pour resin to create a lake or sea that the monster would be sitting in. Unfortunately, I knew that the lack of a complete monster would look very obvious and silly unless I made the water completely opaque. I didn't want to do that or risk the unknowns of trying to fix the serpent, so I pivoted. I'll probably use this serpent sometime in the future, but for now, I decided to go with the tried and true medieval dragon. If you saw the thumbnail, you already knew that. To get the base in order for this monster switch up, I had to cut off the raised shoreline and patch up those holes with some little pink foam plugs. I glued on some medium-sized foam pieces to create some extra surface detail, and the base that came with the dragon had this neat little Halloween decoration on it, so I decided to implement that onto the big base as well. Next, it was time for the terrain paste. After that was thoroughly mixed, I spread it all over the base. And while it was still wet, I threw on some pebbles and sand, and I glued all of it together with some watered down white glue. I also used some isopropyl alcohol to ease the tension. I then set the base aside to dry, and it was time to paint the minis. I decided to paint them in a different way this time, and I started with all black instead of a zenithal highlight. I followed a dragon painting video by a Spanish painter named Angel Giraldez. I will link that video as well as his Instagram account below. He does some incredible work. My dragon is definitely a far cry from his, but I'm still very happy with the results. The process is mostly done with an airbrush, layering up paint from specific directions to create gradients and catch the highlights and the shadows. I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot from that video. Because of the red color scheme, this dragon ended up looking like it could be a relative, maybe a cousin or a sibling, of Donkey's dragon from Shrek. After all the airbrushing was done, I gave the dragon a manicure, a pedicure, I painted all of its teeth and little spikes, and the rest of the details, including its sinister yellow eyes. That was it for the dragon, so I moved on to the knight. For the knight, I started with the same black primer and I began layering up the paints with a brush instead of an airbrush this time. I I gave him a brown horse with a red harness and bridle, and I was originally going to attempt a non-metallic metal for his armor, but I chickened out, and I went with a very metallic metal instead. I used Culture Hustle's Liquid Mirror for the armor, which is incredible paint, but in the end it ended up being a little bit too shiny, so I had to dial it all back with some Nuln Oil and some sepia washes. After that, the knight was ready for battle. I took the base outside and I primed it with a black primer, and then I sprayed it from one direction with a purple shade color, and the opposite direction with a warm light color. After looking at it for a little bit, I didn't think that would look good with the figures, because I had not painted them with the same directional light, so I sprayed over the top with a mid-tone of khaki, and then I added some dry brushing and some multicolored washes to bring some life to the base. After that, I let it dry, and it was time to move on to the lighting. Originally, I was going to use this straight filament for the fire, but I realized that the dragon's posture lent itself well to a curved flame, as if the dragon had followed the knight as he galloped around, looking for a good moment to strike. I bent a copper rod to help support the filament, and I embedded it in the monster's mouth. I then measured and marked out the spots on the base that needed holes for the wires to pass through. I drilled some pilot holes, and then I used my Dremel to make the holes a little bigger and easier to thread the wires through. To power this display, I'm using two AA batteries. I screwed the housing into place, and then I routed out a hole for my switch. I made a flange for the switch from a piece of plastic, and then I glued that into position. I then stripped and soldered the positive lead from the batteries to the switch, and then I ran it through the bottom of the base. Is it just me, or does this look like something from a nature documentary? I then ran the wire up to the dragon's head, and I fixed the dragon in place before wiring the ends of the filaments to their corresponding negative and positive leads. After testing my circuit, I began adding the cotton. To create a fiery look, I made the plume wider as it got further from the dragon's mouth. I used hot glue to hold everything together, and I made sure that the glue was stuck to the support rod and not just the filament. The final touch to make the cotton look flaming hot was to paint it like Cheetos, but not the flaming hot Cheetos, just the original Cheetos with some char marks. The last things to do were to glue the little knight in place and paint the sides of the diorama with black 3.0. After that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.